The moment Lydia Voss stepped off the cold iron train, she felt every eye on the platform turn toward her. Silver Creek was a place where strangers didn't come unless they had a reason, and this quiet woman in a navy dress carried a reason heavy enough to bend her shoulders. But she wasn't the only one watching. A tall man stepped out from the shadows near the station wall, boots polished, coat tailored, shoulders broad as a barn door. His gray eyes locked on her with the sharpness of a man who made fast decisions and never doubted them. Lydia knew instantly. This was Clyde Bonner, the rancher who had summoned her here with a telegram so brief and cold it could have been carved from stone. But as he approached her, something else moved in the air. Not warmth, no, something stronger, something dangerous. She didn't know it yet, but nothing in her life would remain the same after this moment. Clyde stopped in front of her, taking in her plain dress, her neat hair, her nervous hands clutching her traveling bag. "Miss Voss!" It wasn't a greeting, it was confirmation, as if she were a shipment he'd ordered. "Mr. Bonner," she answered softly. He took her trunk with one strong motion and led her toward a black carriage that gleamed in the gray November light. Inside, red leather seats wrapped around her like warmth she wasn't sure she deserved. "The ranch is 12 miles from town," Clyde said as the carriage rolled forward. "We'll discuss the arrangement when we arrive." He said the word arrangement like a banker signing a contract, not a man meeting the woman who would share his home or his bed. Lydia folded her hands tightly. She had traveled from Iowa with one fragile hope, to become a mother. She knew Clyde wanted the same, though his reasons were rooted in legacy, not love. Still, she told herself she could live with that. She had lived with far worse. As the carriage rattled across the frozen ground, she studied the man opposite her. He looked younger than his stern letters suggested. Maybe 35, maybe less. His gray eyes rarely stopped moving, as if he were always measuring, calculating, deciding. "Have you been to Montana Territory before?" he asked suddenly. "No, sir." "You'll find it harsh, cold, honest." He said the last word like it mattered. Lydia nodded. "I'm not afraid of hard places." His eyes flicked toward her. For the first time, something like curiosity broke through the steel wall of his expression. The ranch rose over the next hill. Massive white buildings, tall barns, corrals full of horses, cowboys moving like pieces of a well-oiled machine. It was more than land. It was an empire. And Clyde ruled it like a king. Inside the grand house, Lydia was led upstairs by Pearl Haskins, the stern housekeeper who stared at her as if she were a stray dog that had wandered inside. "This room is yours," Pearl said. "Mr. Bonner has high standards. Best not disappoint him." Lydia touched the silk bedspread, overwhelmed. No man had ever prepared a room for her. She had slept in boarding houses and small rented rooms, never in a place like this. But it also reminded her she was here to serve a purpose. To give Clyde Bonner the child he wanted. Nothing more. When the dinner bell rang at 7, she descended the stairs wearing a deep green dress Clyde had ordered for her. His gaze swept over her, pausing on her face for one long heartbeat. "The dress suits you," he said. It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. They ate in silence at a long mahogany table until Clyde finally set down his fork and said, "Now we discuss terms." He brought her into his study, a room filled with maps, books, and the weight of a lifetime of decisions. He opened a ledger and began listing expectations the way another man might list cattle counts. Her duty was to conceive and bear his child. She would follow the doctor's instructions without question. She would not involve herself in ranch business. She would receive an allowance. She would not write to any men. Their intimacy would begin once the doctor confirmed she was fit for pregnancy. Lydia kept her face calm, even as her heart thudded painfully. She had agreed to this. She had chosen this. But hearing it spoken aloud made it feel colder than she expected. "What happens after the child is born?" she asked. "You will raise it," Clyde answered, "as any mother would." "And you?" she whispered. "Will you take a wife someday?" "No," his voice hardened. "I had one." She left. Quote, the air changed. Lydia saw the shadow behind his eyes, the hurt he carried like an old scar. She didn't ask more. But she understood him better in that moment. He wasn't cold by nature. He was cold because warmth had betrayed him. "I accept your terms," she said quietly. Clyde closed the ledger and looked at her with a steady gaze. "Good. Dr. Morrison will examine you tomorrow. Then we begin." She rose to leave, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. But just as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Miss Voss." She turned. "Welcome to Silver Creek Ranch." It wasn't warm. It wasn't soft. But it was something. Something that made her breath catch as she realized her life had just stepped into a new chapter, one she could no longer walk away from. The next morning dawned pale and cold, the kind of Montana winter light that made everything look sharper than it really was. Lydia dressed carefully, her hands trembling as she fastened the buttons of her new dress. She reminded herself she had chosen this life. She had walked onto that train. She had accepted Clyde's terms. But choice didn't stop her heart from racing the moment Clyde appeared in the hallway. "Dr. Morrison is waiting," he said. No good morning, no soft smile, just calm, steady authority. Lydia followed him to the study, where the doctor, a dignified older man, examined her with professional efficiency, while Pearl stood nearby with the stiff posture of a prison guard. When Dr. Morrison finished, he snapped his case shut. "She is in excellent health," he said. "No concerns." Clyde nodded once. "Good. That will be all." Lydia swallowed hard. She knew what came next. But Clyde surprised her. He didn't touch her. He didn't lead her upstairs. He didn't even look at her the way she expected he would. Instead, he said, "We'll speak tonight." And with that, he walked out into the cold morning air to join his cowboys. All day, Lydia drifted through the house like a woman walking through a new world. She explored the library, discovering shelves of books that told her more about Clyde's mind than he ever would with words. He read about ranching. He read about poetry. He read about people. He read about building and losing and rebuilding again. A man who truly felt nothing wouldn't read like this. When the sun was low, Lydia found herself in the garden, coat wrapped tight around her shoulders, watching the cowboys train horses in the corral. The sky was turning orange and gold, and she wondered if Clyde ever saw beauty, or if he only counted acres and cattle. "You should come inside," a calm voice said behind her. Clyde stood in the doorway, snow on his coat, hair wind-tossed, eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "It's cold," he added. She followed him into the warm house, the air thick with the smell of stew and fresh bread. Dinner was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Clyde watched her more than he ate, and Lydia felt her heart flutter in ways she didn't expect from a man who spoke so little. When Pearl cleared the table, Clyde rose. "Walk with me," he said. She followed him toward the back hallway where moonlight spilled in through tall windows. He paused there, hands in his pockets, jaw tight as if he were fighting something inside himself. "I'm not a man who does things halfway," he said finally. "Not with my land, not with my work, and not with this." "This," she whispered. "Our arrangement." He took a step closer, his voice lower now, warmer. "I told you this was a business matter. I meant it. But life—" He exhaled slowly. "Life doesn't always behave." Her heart thudded. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Clyde looked at her with eyes no longer shielded by distance or control. "I don't want you to think what happens between us is mechanical. Or duty." Quote. The words seemed difficult for him, as if he wasn't used to giving them away. "I want respect," she said quietly. "Kindness. Some sense that I am more than a tool for an heir." "You are," he said at once, surprising her. "You are more than that." Silence stretched between them like something fragile and new. Then Lydia stepped closer, stopping just inches from him. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "Why do you fear anything that feels like affection?" His jaw worked. His eyes flicked away. Lydia thought he might turn cold again, but he didn't. "My wife left," he said finally, "took her things and her promises, and walked out the door. She said I was too serious, too steady, too much of the wrong kind of man." "That must have hurt," Lydia said gently. "Enough to make me build walls high enough no one could climb them again." She reached up, fingers brushing the sleeve of his coat. "Some walls," she said softly, "aren't meant to last forever." Her touch froze him. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he stepped even closer, breath warm against her temple, voice barely above a whisper. "You make it difficult," he murmured. "What?" "Keeping distance, keeping this simple." She felt her heartbeat in her throat. His nearness made her chest tighten, but not with fear. With something deeper, something she had once convinced herself she would never feel. "Clyde," she whispered, "I'm not asking you for romance." He tilted his head, eyes burning into hers. "Then what are you asking me for?" She gathered her courage. "Honesty, respect, and a chance at something real. For both of us." He didn't answer at first. Instead, he lifted his hand, brushing a straight curl near her cheek with a gentleness that stole her breath. His touch was warm, careful, almost reverent. "I don't know if I can give what you want," he said. "And I don't need you to be perfect," she whispered. "Just honest." His fingers stilled. His eyes dropped to her lips for a single unguarded moment before he stepped back as if fighting himself. "We'll take this slowly," he said, voice rough. "No rush, no expectations. We figure it out together." And for the first time since arriving at Silver Creek Ranch, Lydia felt something inside her loosen. A small, fragile hope curling warm against her ribs. Maybe this arrangement was becoming something more. Maybe Clyde Bonner wasn't the cold-hearted man he pretended to be. Maybe he had more to give than land and money and rules. Maybe, just maybe, he had a heart, one he didn't know how to offer but was trying to anyway. Winter settled hard over Silver Creek Ranch, covering the land in thick blankets of snow that softened the world but sharpened the loneliness inside a house as large as Clyde Bonner's. Yet somehow, Lydia didn't feel alone, not anymore. The change between her and Clyde had been quiet, subtle, and steady, like a fire catching slow but burning warm. He knocked on her door each morning before breakfast, not out of duty, but out of something gentler. He invited her on short rides when the weather allowed, showing her parts of the ranch he had never shared with anyone else. And most surprising of all, he listened to her. Truly listened. One evening, after a late snowstorm forced everyone inside, Lydia found Clyde in the library, staring at a book he wasn't reading. The fire cast golden light across his face, softening the hard lines. She hesitated in the doorway until he looked up. "Come in," he said quietly. "Sit with me." She joined him by the fire. For a long moment they simply shared the warmth, the quiet crackling of logs filling the space between them. "How are you adjusting?" Clyde finally asked. Lydia turned her head toward him. "Better than I expected." He studied her carefully. "And this life? This house? This arrangement?" She heard the unspoken question. "And me?" She chose honesty. "I'm learning you're not who you pretend to be." He stiffened. "What do I pretend to be?" "A man with no softness," she said gently. "No hope, no nerves, no fear." He looked away. Softness gets a man hurt. Quote, "So does shutting out the world," she whispered. A long silence settled between them before Clyde rubbed a hand across his jaw in frustration. "You make me question every wall I built," he said, "and I don't know what to do with that." She smiled softly. "Maybe you don't have to do anything. Maybe letting things unfold is enough." But Clyde Bonner was not a man who let things unfold. He made decisions. He took control. He built empires with his bare hands. And that night, something inside him shifted again. "Lydia," he said, voice rough, "walk with me." Confused, she followed him through the hallway and up the stairs to the second floor. He paused outside his bedroom door, the door she'd never once stepped through since arriving. He didn't touch her. He didn't pressure her. He simply said, "I don't want this room to be separate from the rest of my life anymore." He opened the door slowly. She stepped inside. The room was warm, masculine, and entirely Clyde. Dark woods, deep green fabrics, a tall bed, the faint scent of leather and cedar. Lydia's heart beat fast, not from fear, but from understanding. "I don't want to start this part of our life because of a contract," Clyde said. "I want to start it because we choose to." Her breath caught. "Do you still want this?" he asked softly. Lydia reached for his hand. Yes. What followed was not the raw desperation she'd feared, nor the cold duty she'd dreaded. It was gentle, slow, emotion-driven. A closeness built on trust rather than expectation, a night that felt like the true beginning of something neither had dared say aloud. Afterwards they lay beneath warm blankets, her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her like he couldn't bear to let her go. "Things are changing," Clyde whispered into her hair. "I know. And they scare me." "I know," she said again, her fingers tracing small circles on his chest, "but that doesn't make them wrong." A hush fell over them until Clyde finally said, "Lydia, I've been thinking." "About what?" "About us. About permanence." She lifted her head. "Clyde." He met her eyes, his gray gaze filled with vulnerability she never thought she'd see. "I want a wife, not a contract, not an arrangement. A partner." Her breath hitched. "And I want that partner to be you." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Clyde sat up quickly. "If you don't want—" "I do," she whispered. The relief that washed over his face made her chest ache. She wiped her eyes and added, "But I have conditions." His eyebrow rose. "Of course you do. First, a real wedding, a celebration, the town invited, not a transaction done in secret." He nodded immediately. "Done." "Second, I want to share responsibilities, the books, the ranch decisions. I want to be part of your world, not just standing at the edges." His eyes softened. "You already are." "And third," she touched his face, "never hide from me again." A long silence passed before he placed his hand over hers. No more hiding. Their wedding came in spring, the little church full of friends, ranch hands, and curious townsfolk. Lydia walked down the aisle in a cream lace gown while Clyde stood waiting for her, eyes shining with something that no longer needed hiding. 6 months later, riding across the bright Montana fields with Clyde beside her and their child growing beneath her heart, Lydia felt a peace she had never known. "What are you thinking about?" Clyde asked, reaching for her hand. "That I almost missed all of this," she whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. "We have a lifetime ahead to make up for it." Ahead of them, Silver Creek Ranch stretched wide under the endless sky, a future built not on an arrangement, but on a love that had taken root in the hardest of places and grown strong enough to last. Because sometimes the life you never expected becomes the life you were meant for.